later on, so I'm going to do it first thing in the beginning. We want to thank EJ Nicely from Nicely Done, who does the technical work to make this webinar work for us. I'm probably going to run and see a doctor right after this meeting because he almost gave me a heart attack because he didn't show up until about 10 or 15 minutes before the webinar started, and I was worried that I was going to have Jeremy fill in, and I wasn't sure that we could do all of that. So, but anyway, Jeremy could, I'm sure. Anyway, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to review how the percentage of dollars in the classroom is calculated and issues related to this calculation. Probably there's very few issues in the state that are misunderstood as percentage of dollars in the classroom. And hopefully after today, you'll have a lot better understanding of how that's calculated and what it really means. And we want to thank the Auditor General, the Office of the Auditor General, because a lot of the information that we have today comes from their comprehensive report that they do each year. Their next report will most likely come out near the end of February for fiscal year 2014, but it's a very comprehensive document and provides a lot of good information, and we would encourage people to go to their website and look at the latest report that's there and some of the prior reports, because there's just a lot of good information about the state as a whole and also on individual school districts. At the end of today's webinar, we will have Janice Palmer and Jeff Esposito from ASBA will talk a little bit about what you can do to kind of take the information that's presented today and maybe have your legislators and community better understand this particular issue. Now, Jeremy and I will cover the calculation. We'll start out with the overall picture of how it gets calculated. Jeremy will show you how some of the areas that are not counted in the classroom are structured and which people are included in those calculations, and then he will also talk about the Kyrene School District and how their calculation works. And then you'll see not only the overall picture but also the actual details of how it works in an individual school district. During the webinar, if you have some questions, please type them into the chat box. Depending on how much time we have at the end, we'll try and answer some of those questions, but you can type them in during the presentation, and we'll take a look at those near the end. So now we'll go to the first slide that you can see, concepts behind this calculation. And the percentage of dollars in the classroom calculation has been around for a long period of time. It comes from the definitions, and the categories come from the U.S. Department of Education, National Center for Education Statistics, and they define the categories. The calculation is pretty simple. You divide the amount spent in the classroom, according to their definition, by total operational spending, and that gives you the percentage of dollars in the classroom. The calculation includes all K-12 spending, excluding capital outlay, and debt payments. So all of your state dollars, your local dollars, and your federal dollars that are in your general operating budget are included in that calculation. And now we'll actually look at how the formula works. And basically it's classroom dollars, and we'll define that very shortly, divided by your total expenditures, which would include what you, in the denominator, what you actually spent in classroom dollars are included in there, but then you add in administration, plant operations, food services, transportation, student support services, and instruction support services. And the dollar amounts in the classroom divided by your total operational expenditures for all the classroom dollars and your non-classroom dollars give you the percentage of dollars in the classroom. Now we're going to look at what are classroom dollars. And it's a very limited definition when you look at that. Later on we'll talk about some of the things that most citizens and many people in the school district would think are part of the direct instructional program, but the federal definition basically includes the teachers, teachers' aides, substitute teachers, athletic coaches. Those people are considered classroom. You have the instructional supplies that would go directly into the classroom, paper, pencils, crayons. instructional aids, textbooks, workbooks, instructional kits, and activities. Money spent on field trips, athletics, co-curricular activities like choir and band, and tuition that would be paid to out-of-state and private institutions. Those are what goes in the numerator. Those are direct classroom dollars, and that's according to the federal definition. Now we'll start looking at non-classroom dollars. And these are the areas that are defined at the federal level, and the Auditor General's office analyzes each one of these non-classroom dollars areas on an individual basis, and we'll share with you that information very shortly. But you have one of the largest areas is plant operations and maintenance, and we'll show you how those what's actually included in those dollars in a later slide. Student support services, and you'll see later on that many of the student support services are related to special services. Services that are provided to disabled students are a large part of student support services. Having the category of instruction support services, food service, transportation, and administration. One of the major misunderstandings is that people initially think or talk about what isn't in the classroom as administration, and hopefully we'll show you how we can put that in perspective as we go through the rest of these calculations. First category we're going to go to in more detail is in non-classroom dollars is plant operations and maintenance. And this would be salary, benefits, and other costs related to maintaining your facilities, repairing equipment, custodial services, grounds, security, would be the major labor costs that are related to keeping your buildings open. One of the important things that I think to consider is that probably the majority of those dollars go into maintaining and keeping the classrooms going, because in most school districts, that's where the major part of your facilities are classrooms. But that all falls into plant operations and maintenance. And then you have heating and cooling costs and property insurance. Heating and cooling would be your electric bills, your gas bills, whatever you pay to keep your utilities, and water, keeping your utilities in place. That's plant operations and maintenance. Next category that is covered by non-classroom dollars is student support services. And that's what we talked about earlier, that a lot of these are related to your special education programs. It's salaries and benefits for attendance clerks, social workers, counselors. And we'll show you later on that counselors are a big part of this area. Nurses, audiologists, speech pathologists, and other costs related to support services to students. Physical therapists, occupational therapists, they would all be included in non-classroom dollars, but they're in the student support services category. Next is instruction support services. And these are programs that basically would cover curriculum directors, special education directors, teacher trainers, librarians, media specialists, instructional related IT staff, and other costs related to assisting instructional staff in the delivery of instruction. Probably the two categories we just talked about, student support services and instruction support services, for many citizens and people in your community, they would think of that as critical and a very major part of the instructional program. But the way the federal definition works, those are included in non-classroom dollars, even though most of those people working in those categories are providing services to students or providing to teachers who teach students. Next one is food service. And probably most of you are familiar with food services would be the salaries and benefits for the people working in your cafeteria, food supplies, and other costs related to preparing, transporting, and servicing meals and snacks. Important thing is you look at, and remember how this is calculated. You start out with dollars in the classroom, and you divide it by all of your expenditures, including the dollars in the classroom, plus these other non-classroom services. Food service, ironically, if you have a very extensive food service program, that's going to decrease or increase the denominator in that calculation, and it'll make your percentage of dollars in the classroom smaller. And this impacts a number of school districts who have a large population who might be on free and reduced lunch, they'll have larger food service programs, and that does impact the calculation for percentage of dollars in the classroom. Next one we'll look at is transportation. And this would be the salaries and benefits and other costs related to transporting students to and from school, school activities, and maintaining buses. Just same comment as we talk about food service. If you're a district that has a very large transportation program, that's going to make the denominator in the calculation larger because you're transporting kids to and from school. If you have to transport them a long way to go to their school activities, you have a lot of unpaved roads where you have to maintain your buses, that will lead to a lower percentage of dollars in the classroom, even though both of those services may be very important to students to make sure they're properly fed and get to school and get back home and get to their activities. Ironically, it can be stated if you eliminated your food service program and eliminated your transportation program, the percentage of dollars in the classroom would be higher. Nobody would want to do that, but it's important to understand this, how they relate to that overall calculation. Now the next one we'll get to is administration. And as we said earlier, one of the problems we have is some people look at this in a very basic area and think that everything that isn't in the classroom is administration. As you'll see later on, this is a portion of your non-classroom dollars, but it's not by far the largest portion. And this would be salaries and benefits for superintendents, principals, business managers, administrative technology services, and other costs related to the governing board and operating the school districts. That is what the definition for administration is. Now we'll talk a little bit about non-classroom dollars, and what we have in the next slide is this would be the percentage of all of the non-classroom areas. So what we're trying to do here is to show you what are those major areas and what are the ones that aren't quite as major. So we want to make sure you don't get this confused, that this would be the percentage of the whole district budget spent on these items. This is where we've separated the non-classroom spending into particular categories. And you can see plan operations is one of the larger areas, and if you compare that to administration, it's one of the smaller areas, but you can see the non-classroom expenditures in the state for fiscal year 2013 was 46% of the total. And according to the Auditor General's report, total expenditures were $7,496 for all the things that were covered in their operating budget that we've talked about. Classroom expenditures were $4,000 and non-classroom were $3,465. But you can see what makes up the non-classroom areas. Hopefully have a realization how important many of those areas are to the instructional program by providing services to students and to teachers, getting students to and from school and feeding them. So there's a lot of important items that are classified as non-classroom that are really important to the instructional program. Again, just want to reinforce that this is the percentage of non-classroom expenditures, not the total calculations. This is to give you some idea of which are the larger categories and which are the smaller categories. And now I will turn it over to Jeremy, who will talk about the non-classroom dollars and the different areas that we've talked about so far, and will also be able to give you in each of those areas what are the types of expenditures that make up that particular area. And again, I want to stress that all of this information that we're presenting to you came out of the Auditor General's report. It's just there's just a ton of information that's available in that report, but we're trying to put it in perspective so people can get a feel for what non-classroom really means and what classroom means. So I will turn it over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, I want to encourage all of you to stay till the end of the presentation because I do have a couple of announcements at the very end, so make sure you stay with us throughout the duration. Let's take a look at plan operations first. And I'll have people sometimes tell me that, you can teach under a tree. That's true, but somebody still has to mow the grass and trim the tree. When you look at plan operation, the costs that are left in there after about 4 or 5 years worth of budget cuts that we've been going through lately are at the bare minimum. I know at our district, we contract out custodial services, and we go with the lowest bidder, and we get what we get for that. And at the same time, you have portions of plant operations, such as the energy and water, which you see makes up a significant portion of plant operations, that we have no control over. So SRP is doing another rate increase coming up in another month and a half here, and that's something we don't have control over. So that's something that we can't even reduce in. But plant operations is the first place that you go to once you know you have to make a budget cut. There's energy performance contractors out there. There's a whole bunch of other different ways that we're looking at this and trying to bring those costs down. But you can only do so much, especially when you're looking at not replacing equipment or buildings at the rate that we used to. So, that cooler, the chiller, everything else that you're holding on to for an extra 5 years because you can't afford to replace the entire amount, or the roof that you're patching up, all those items require more maintenance now because you're trying to push them past their lifespan. And when they require more maintenance, that's going to see a little bit more cost on plant operations. But you can see the breakdown there, with salaries and benefits being the majority of it, and then the energy right behind that. The next one that we're going to look at is student support. And as Chuck pointed out, these are some services that parents really value, and some particular parents may tell you that they actually value these services more than the classroom teacher because of what these speech pathologists, these psychologists, the way that they're able to get through to their children. They'll tell you that they actually value these more than the classroom teacher, but it's something that's often overlooked when people are looking at the classroom spending report, because there's two numbers that everyone jumps to. They jump to your percentage of dollars in the classroom, and then they want to know your percentage of dollars for administration. They don't always quite relate student support and instructional support and how they help guide the child's education.
Jeremy, I also want to remind that for a lot of people that a lot of these programs can't be cut because they're in the student's IEP and are required by state and federal law. And especially in this category, probably has more mandated programs than just about any of the other categories.
And also that there's disparity between the amount of population of these students that are in one district or another, or a district and a charter. So in some cases, when your student support is high, a lot of times that's related to the population that you're serving. The next area we want to look at is instruction support. And as you can see, the majority of this is used to improve instruction. So provide professional development for those teachers, and I don't think anyone's going to question how important professional development is, whether that's through having math and literacy coaches that work one-on-one with the teachers and help them improve their craft, or through any other number of means to improve that instruction, and to take that good look at your curriculum and see when your curriculum needs to be improved as well. So again, another category that doesn't get the credit it deserves when you're looking at the importance of how you're spending your funds. I'd agree with Chuck that we should probably be taking a better look at instruction support and student support being combined with classroom dollars when you're talking about how effectively you're using the funds that you have available. Our next category is food service. And with food service, food service should be independent. It shouldn't even be in this study, as Chuck pointed out. With that program, it's not having a real impact on your classroom dollars. It isn't like you can collect enough lunch money that all of a sudden you can go pay a classroom teacher with it, because of the fact that the food service funds have to stay in food service. So, for food service, you can see that almost half of it is spent on the food, and then the rest of it is kind of with the delivery and preparation of the food. But again, this is a category that should probably be looked at separately and not as a part of this equation. The next category is transportation. And a lot of us know that we are lucky to break even with transportation. If you can run your transportation program and it pays for itself, you're doing a good job. There are parts of transportation that we can't control. When you look at federal mandates for things like McKinney-Vento, When you look at IEPs that require door-to-door service, those are times when you have to provide that transportation. It's not an area you can actually cut. The majority of this is going towards salaries and benefits. So you see, it's providing those bus drivers to make sure that we can get those kids to school. I would say if you're going to cut transportation, you would have to look at if this state wanted to be a state that didn't provide transportation. But again, because of federal laws and because of the IEPs for certain students, you're always going to have some transportation costs.
Jeremy, a couple of the larger districts, I don't know in your particular district in Kyrene, but that I talked to, Mesa, half or more of their transportation costs are for disabled students, again, which are the only students that you really are mandated to transport are disabled students who need special transportation, but in many districts that's a big part of their transportation program. Couldn't be eliminated even if you wanted to because of federal and state law. Yes,
I'd say definitely the disabled and also the McKinney-Vento, because sometimes you might be traveling 50 miles in one direction to transport.
Give a brief explanation of that, of what that is.
Yes, McKinney-Vento, for those who aren't aware, is for families in transition, homeless families. It may sometimes be families that have been forced to double bunk with other family members, and they were previously going to your school because of their life situation. They've had to move away, and so the federal program allows that you would provide transportation to them so they wouldn't see that disruption in their education. Our next category is administration. And you can see that administration is split almost evenly between the site-based administration versus what you're looking at the district office. And when I hear people complain about, what funds are being spent on administration, the first question I'll ask is, well, are you saying your school doesn't need a principal? They're like, well, no, of course we need a principal. I'm like, okay, well, are you saying that nobody needs to give the teachers paychecks, that the teachers just wouldn't get paid? Well, no, teachers have to receive their paychecks. And when you keep asking them more and more questions about, well, what do you mean by, it's a waste of money on administration? I'll keep going until eventually they say, well, you. But aside from me, they really don't have much issue with the fact of knowing that you need to have a payroll department, you need to have an accounting department, you need to have human resources, you need to have a principal at every school. And once you start pulling all of that away, what you see is it really doesn't cost that much for me. It's a lot of those services that we have to provide that make up the vast majority of what's in administration. I'll turn it back over to Chuck.
Next one is to kind of put administration in perspective. And this is from all that information that we've shared with you so far came directly from the Auditor General's report of classroom in the percentage of dollars in the classroom. And as I said at the beginning, it's an excellent report, and districts ought to be sure to look at their own portion of that report in the state reports. And that's where we've gotten all that information from. This one, it comes from Public Education Finances, which is the major financial report at the federal level that looks at school funding, both universities and K-12 education. And this is for the latest report is fiscal year 2012. And what I did is the first category of general administration, I listed a number of districts there to kind of show you how Arizona fits in perspective. You can see the U.S. average was $202 per pupil. Arizona was $85 per pupil. But some of the other districts that were close to Arizona or below Arizona, Hawaii has one school system statewide. Utah has very limited numbers of small districts, just has a few very large school districts. And Florida has very large county districts. So they happen to be a little bit less on general administration, but they're in very unique situations. When you look at the normal states, which have normal school organizations, we do very well. And you can see we rank 47th on general administration, and those districts above us have pretty unique situations. On school administration, we're right at the bottom. We rank 50th. And when you take both Arizona's general administration and school administration, we're the lowest in the country. So I think we do a pretty good job of getting administrative costs down to Can you always look at a way of trying to improve, but we want to put Arizona in perspective where we are in administration. Now we're going to go to the next slide, and this basically comes from the superintendent's annual report. And the School Boards Association put this report together, and I think they recently distributed it. And the superintendent's annual report does the classroom instruction analysis. They report the support categories by lumping them together. But basically, in looking at Arizona in 2014, the annual report that just came out, and see how Arizona and charter schools compare, you can see we have 2 public school systems in the state, and they have a lot in common. Their other support services is 28% for districts and 25% for charters. In classroom instruction, when you add the supplies and together, charters are about 49% and districts are at about 54%. So I wanted to see, do the 2 public school systems in our state operate, and do they operate in quite a similar manner? And you can see that they do. The next slide, in what we were trying to do, is say, okay, well, since fiscal year 2010, there's been some very significant cuts in funding of schools in Arizona. And some of those cuts have affected district schools, and some of them have affected charter schools. And sometimes people look and say, well, for the last couple of years, your percentage of dollars in the classroom have gone down a little bit. And again, looking at the 2 public school systems, both of them have been impacted, and the percentage of dollars in the classroom is down, according to the superintendent's annual report, for both traditional districts and charter schools. And I think a lot of that has to do with, as we talked through this presentation, there's a lot of mandated services for disabled students in the transportation area and student support services. You have to air condition and heat your schools and things of that nature. So the main reason we put these 2 in, to see that what's impacted districts and charters has been quite similar as they've reacted to the reductions in funding from the state. Now the next portion of our presentation, as we talked to you in the very beginning, we're going to have Jeremy go through and look at the more detailed specifics of how the calculation works, and using Kyrene as an example. So I'll turn it back over to Jeremy.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, so time to get technical. Let's look at the actual numbers and the codes and how you're going to go back and calculate your own classroom dollars. So first, we'll look at the excluded codes. And so a lot of this, once again, we'll give credit to the Auditor General's office. They do have a lot of this up on their website, so if you get that nice little 2-page document, you will see a lot of this in there, especially all the stuff in black, the stuff in red. I'm going to talk a little bit more about, because those are the things that you won't get to. So first, you have your list of excluded funds, and basically all the funds, from 600 and above are excluded, with an exception. For 610, 611, 695, if the object code's between 6641 and 6643, in those cases, then then that does count as a classroom right there. For the 611, for anyone wondering what 611, I'll tell you, when I started processing files for individual districts, I came across a district who was using 611 to distinguish between their capital override and their unrestricted capital. So they had actually got 611, approved as one of the funds that they were looking at. So I thought I'd go ahead and add theirs in. Soft capital you don't have anymore, 625, but all of your operational spending that you had in there was included as well. Programs, any program 700 and above is excluded. So the first thing you want to do when you're looking at your classroom dollars is make sure you get all these exclusions, take all those transactions off the table before you start trying to separate your expenditures into different categories. On the functions, the 3200s and the 3300s are excluded, but that's not on the Auditor General's page that they put out there for you. The reason why it's not, I got the explanation from them, and I'll tell you, both John Ward and Mike Quinlan, they've worked very well with me and being very blunt and open about how they are coding things down there. And the reason why those aren't listed as excluded is because if you are coding them correctly, for instance, 3300 should only be used with program code 900. When you're coding them correctly, then one of the other exclusions will end up applying that'll eliminate those transactions. But whatever you are putting into 3200 and 3300, they are taking a look at some of those and seeing if maybe there's something that needs to change on how you coded it. 4000 and above is excluded. On the object codes, for all of us finance people, this is going to be pretty obvious. But my thing is, I live in this paranoid world where if people get data and they get a little bit of information, they start doing their own interpretations. And so I just think it's good to point out that we're only talking about object codes that are above 6,000, not any of the object codes that are under 6,000. So just in case someone out there gets their hands on a database with all your transactions and starts to try to apply these rules, they know that we're only talking about the 6,000s here. The other object codes, those ones are listed on their form, with the exception of 6631. That's commodities. So for food service, your commodities are not included. So that's just something to know for any of you who have not taken the time to split out your commodities and code those separately. Maybe you have a contracted food service vendor and you just let it all go in there. It's worth the extra effort to go ahead and split out your commodities because those are not part of the calculation for food service. The next thing I wanted to do is start to break these down. So when you start splitting them into categories, you're going to do it based on function. And so this chart just gives you a list of which functions are going under which different areas. So you have the 7 different areas, and you have the series of functions that would be counted for those different areas. I won't read it off to you. You guys can see that, and hopefully you all got a copy of the slides so you can work through that. The next thing I did want to touch on is a Kyrene example. This is this year's report that isn't released yet. So I calculated this for us back in late September, and you all should have got your email from the Auditor General's office where they ask you to confirm a lot of the other information that goes into your report. When I got that email, I wrote back to them and I asked for my calculation on my classroom dollars so I could verify that information as well. John Ward did get that to me, so I got to thank him for that. And what you can see is that we are almost an identical match on just about every category. I'll talk about a little bit of the differences. We're off $102 in classroom. And when I looked, so I went straight back to my database, pulled all transactions for $102 that I had coded to the classroom, and looked through them, and it stuck out like a sore thumb. There was something in there that said fuel. Like, well, that's not classroom. So I agree with them that $102 doesn't belong in the classroom. Someone typed in the wrong function code. I'll tell you, my team, I got a great staff over there, but you type in, 100,000 transactions, you're bound to go ahead and get one of them wrong. So that $102 didn't belong under classroom. But my only issue with the process is that I feel that we should be getting back a spreadsheet, whether it's 2 transactions or 200 transactions, a spreadsheet that comes back to us and tells us, look, these are the items that we feel are miscoded, that we're going to recode as such for the purposes of our classroom spending report. Do you approve of these items? Because just like I know my people can be right 100% of the time, as good as they may be, I know that the Auditor General's office cannot be right 100% of the time. But if the 2 of us are talking about this and reconciling numbers, then I do believe we will have a quality product that we can all agree on. Some of the other changes on here, so the big difference, and I'm not conceding this one yet, me and John Ward are still talking about this one, but transportation and plant. So I have some GPS systems for our buses that we have coded in transportation, and they have coded over in plant, and I still need to investigate that one further and have some further discussions before we can both come to an agreement on whether or not those GPSs belong in transportation or plant. But that's the major difference on our numbers between the 2 of us. But a lot of them you'll see are exactly right on. Like I think about half these categories to the dollar we've balanced. So pretty happy with the process. Happy enough anyway. So for anyone who sent me your files, I've done the same work for you, and I would expect that your numbers are pretty much in line the same way my numbers are in line. So those numbers that you got from me back in November should still be accurate and will most likely match what comes out on their report in the next month or two.
Jeremy, this is a good, this slide is really good to show some of the points that we made earlier. Let's say food service. If for some reason you expanded your food service program, you had a lot more kids who qualified for free and reduced lunch. If you spend $1 million more in food service, what that does is it decreases the percentage in the classroom because you're going to have a larger portion in food service rather than in all your other categories. But I think this is a good slide to show how everything's all connected. If you have any one food service, transportation, where you're spending high amounts of money because of some unique situation in your community, that's going to affect the percentage of dollars in your classroom report.
Yes, yes, definitely. Anytime any of those categories go up, and I'll tell you, Kyrene, the reason why we have low food services, we do have some parts of our community, probably the majority of our community, they're in affluent areas, and we don't get high participation for breakfast, or even during lunch. We have a lot of people who bring in their lunch. So in another district with just as many students, they may have significantly more expenditures in food service, which then hurts the percentage of dollars that are going into the classroom. And so the next slide that I was going to touch on was again, just reminding you that the auditors do have that discretion to reclassify items that they feel are improperly coded. Some of the things you can see why they picked up on them. So when it's an object code that looks like it doesn't belong with that function, then that's obviously going to be a key to go ahead and look further into the item. And then the description that you provide that goes along with it will probably confirm their belief if it is indeed miscoded. Some things that we would like to probably start looking into, and I'm going to put some more work out there for Bruce and all of his guys over there at Tyler. We're still working on another project concerning the SFB, but I would like to see us move towards making the system be smart enough to stop us from making mistakes and things that are obvious mistakes. So if an object code can't be used with a certain function code, I would like it that when our people are typing it in, that it would kick out that error to them and say, this object code is invalid for the function code that you've used, so that way they can figure out which one of the two doesn't fit. So that's maybe some technical solutions that we can look at as we go forward. I did say that I had two announcements for you. First, so the database that I talked about earlier that I used to create your classroom spending percentages, that for everyone who's in the ASBO data collection project, or for anyone who gets signed up for the ASBO data collection project, we do need your support. I'm going to give it out to you at the summer conference. So I'll bring some out on flash drives, and everybody I find out that's signed up, you're going to get a copy of that database, so that way you won't even have to email me next time. You'll just be able to run it yourself. It'll be real simple. You just tell it where your text file is. It'll pull it in. It'll run your numbers and show it to you in a nice little right there in a nice little access table, so that way you can look at it and browse through it yourself, and you can have your numbers right away every time you're doing your AFR. In addition to that, we are still continuing to work at trying to get this report ability to you when you're doing budgets. So just continue to support the ASBO data collection project. We're going to continue to bring you some great things. We just need your support on that one. The next thing I wanted to do is, because I can't pass up the chance to promote the summer conference with such a big audience, I did want to take a minute to tell you about change. Change fathered two children. The first was fear. Fear was the type of child who always questioned his own existence. Why did you have me? Why am I here? Don't you realize that now you will never achieve your dreams? You will never realize your full potential? Don't ever do something like this again. But he was the eldest of twins, and his younger sister was Hope. Hope was the type to light up an entire room with her smile. She would tell her father, just imagine what I can achieve if you nurture, develop, and guide me towards a better future. Imagine what we can accomplish together. The question you have to ask yourself is, which child do you want to gravitate towards? Because at ASBO 2015, we are changing the game, and I hope to see you there. I'll turn it back over to Chuck.
Okay. Before I turn it over to Janice and ASBA to finish up on the presentation for today. Just want to mention something because I've gotten a number of calls from people, and a lot of this percentage of dollars in the classroom has come about because of the governor's budget, where the proposal is to cut district additional assistance and to require districts to then cut their non-classroom expenditures equal to that cut. For example, if the cut was $1 million in district additional assistance, you would have to, the concept is you would have to cut your non-classroom expenses by $1 million. Right now, in talking to the budget people at the governor's office, they've not worked out all the details of that. So we're not going to be able to answer any questions. Well, specifically, how would that work? What would the cut be for my district? Maybe when that information does become available, or if it gets changed, we'll look at having a future webinar. But right now, I can't tell you, and talking to the governor's budget people, because they haven't worked out all the details. So we don't know exactly what the reduction would be on a district-by-district basis and how that would reflect into your cutting your non-classroom expenditures. But as soon as we can get that information, we will share it with you. Now I will turn it over to Janice and ASBA to do the last part of our webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Jeremy. And we just kind of, provided this webinar because it's important that all of us, school board members, administrators, business folks, understand what is considered in the classroom versus non-classroom. And as Chuck mentioned, especially in light of Governor Ducey's proposed budget. And so Jeremy and Chuck have the nuts and bolts of what is, and we can crunch the numbers to understand how this affects your local district. But what we thought just as important, if not more important, is telling that human side of the story behind the numbers and how critical, and Jeremy went into this, but how critical each of these areas are to our student success. And so I'll turn it over to Jeff, who's created a resource to help you tell the local story to your community, your legislators, and hopefully this will help put a face to the numbers that we invest in our kids.
Thanks, Janice. So the point behind this document, as Janice mentioned, was to make it easy for you to sort of humanize this issue for legislators, policymakers, your community, anybody who has questions. So we created this simple outline, as you can see here, where you can just plug in your district name, number of students, how many people you employ, that sort of information, and stories about the services that would be impacted, people that benefit from these services. There's an example there of a news story about a janitor who worked with his school's counselor to help at-risk kids within their school. Both of those positions would be impacted by cuts like these. So this worksheet is just sort of a guide to help you out. You can find it on our Take Action page, which is just at www.azsba.org/take-action, right? And you can find it under the Advocacy tab on our main website as well, azsba.org. If you have any questions, you can also just reach out to either Janice or I, and we can guide you to it. So there will be one page here where it's just this fact sheet, those few examples, right, how they can contact you, an action request which has a typo in it, so we'll fix that for you. And then the second page, which we hope you print this out front and back, so it's just a one-pager you can hand to folks, very simple, includes those definitions that Chuck and Jeremy went over earlier, so that people can understand what these really mean, what they include, what these things are. And then there is, lastly, that picture of that graph comparing district and charter schools and their classroom versus non-classroom dollar costs. So we hope that this information is helpful for you to help explain it to your community, to your legislators, and sort of humanize, as I mentioned, this issue a little bit more and help make this issue a little bit more understandable for the people that are going to be impacted by it.
I would just add on, even though this has ASBA's item on it, please feel free to take it off, put your own district's logo. This really is meant to be a working document. We just wanted to provide it as easy as possible for you to provide that information, again, to your community and to your legislators. And with that, I think that that concludes the actual official part of the webinar. So let's take a look if we have any questions from folks. And we do. So
Artie's popping it up on the screen for us now. Let's see some of the questions coming in.
Okay, so the first question. Oh, we're not at the top yet.
No, no.
Oh, wow. Okay, my eyes aren't as good as they used to be. Okay, so the first question. So if you got a large counseling grant from the federal government, your dollars in the classroom would be negatively impacted as a percentage. Jeremy.
Actually, can we get the lights back on, Ernie? There we go. Hold on. We're trying to get light enough for the projector, but at the same time light enough that I can actually see some papers here.
Okay.
So a federal grant for a counseling federal grant. Well, I'm first trying to figure out what fund would that even go into. Yeah, I would expect that it would, because it's not going to fall under any of the excluded funds. Couldn't really get it excluded any other way. So yeah, there's a good chance that would. I could even look at how you coded it and tell you if that would come out. But yeah,
we'll follow up with that one so that we make sure to provide. We usually don't tell folks this, but we actually can see who is asking the question. So we will follow up with that person. Substitute teachers. Okay, for clarification, substitute teachers for only when regular teachers are out of the classroom for sick leave or all teacher absences. So I think that question is clarification about what is in the classroom or not.
Yeah, because the substitute teacher is still a classroom expense because they're delivering instruction. So it's not so much about what the reason is for why the classroom teacher is gone. It's more about what is the substitute teacher doing, and they're delivering instruction.
Great. So under activities, tax credit dollar expenditures, are they considered classroom dollars?
So Chuck flipped out on us. He's usually faster on some of these things than me. Activities.
Okay, well, we're going
to have to jump at these in like easier order so I can be looking at the other ones at the same time.
How about we go back and forth? So when you're looking at that, so what is being done to educate the governor's staff on this? Basically the difference between classroom, non-classroom, and obviously that's the core of what both ASBO and ASBA are doing. And like we talked about, the first issue is making sure that we as the education community understand what the definitions are so that we know how to answer some of those questions. But then also letting the governor's office as well as the legislature know. And it's interesting. I think that there is a lot of traction for this issue to be better dealt with and better defined. But really, that's what the document that Jeff put together that we hope that you'll be able to use in order to communicate yourself with those actual examples.
The next one is, where does construction costs get counted? Construction costs don't. They're excluded. Capital funds are excluded, so those aren't a part of the equation.
Is it correct that administration is actually twice as much as transportation?
We have that on the state.
I pulled an audible on Jeremy. I was supposed to answer one for me.
Hold on, Chuck had it on one of his slides to show what the exact amounts were on one of the earlier ones. Oh, he did. No, he didn't put that one.
Okay, we'll get back on that one.
That was just a percentage.
Okay, can school board members attend the ASBO summer conference?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's open for everyone.
Was the 59 rank on the the slide supposed to be 50 for Hawaii? And yes, I believe that is correct. That was a typo.
All right. Do homeless and special education transportation costs increase the transportation cost in totality?
Yes. Yes, any type of transportation you're providing will go into your total transportation cost. Let's see. Is the chart of account codes the same for all states? I don't believe it's the same for all states. When I was over at ADE, one of the major projects we had to do every year was to crosswalk our codes to their codes. The National Center for Education Statistics would make us do a report, which they call the NPAS report, and we would have to look at their descriptions and our descriptions and do a crosswalk to make our numbers match their numbers, and we would submit that. So you do have different systems out there in different states.
And this is a big one that we get about under which category do nurses or student health care professionals fall under? Get that a lot of the legislation.
Healthcare is a support service. In fact, on the support slide, you'll actually see how it's broken out, and that it represents 18% of student support. So you can see how it's on that slide within that pie chart. Can food service costs be eliminated if you outsource the program and allow the vendor to keep the revenue? Now, you're still going to have to report your food service costs. The food service vendor, with National School Lunch Program, the food service vendor isn't going to be able to keep that. That's going to go to the district.
Different issue, will these slides be available for us to print from the ASBO website? They're actually currently available there, and will also be on the ASBA website. And then we usually we're recording this webinar right now, and it's usually available within the next 24 hours for future use.
Another one, would a grant from the SFD to repair HVAC systems negatively affect classroom spending percentage? No. The repairs, well, the repairs, said repair. I couldn't see the SFD repairing if you're talking about a building renewal grant. So I'm going to assume you mean replace. And when they replace the HVAC systems, that's not something that's going to show up on the classroom spending. The maintenance that you're spending right now to keep that HVAC system going, that's showing up on the classroom spending report under plan operations.
There's a question here, a couple of questions here about whether or not the document we prepared for you has been translated into Spanish yet. The answer to that is no, it has not been yet, but we will work on getting that accomplished for you. And once it is, it'll be posted on the same place on our Take Action website, on the ASBA website.
Let's see, we got 4 minutes left. We can probably take a couple more of these questions. Does the state have a targeted percentage of instructional dollars? Not to my knowledge, there isn't an actual target that they're going for. The only legislation that we've seen come out so far is the legislation that's talking about possibly making a cut that they would specifically want to hold us to making in non-classroom. But I haven't seen, unless Janice has seen anything, I haven't seen anything about what the state feels would be an acceptable percentage of dollars in the classroom.
No. Jeremy's absolutely right. I mean, we know what the governor's budget proposal looks to reduce non-classroom, and that's a point of clarification as well. At least what's in the actual governor's budget document is non-classroom. I know sometimes we throw around non-classroom and administration as synonymous, and that's not the case. At least is what the governor is looking at, and why it's so important that we understand it so we can better convey the position. But that 5% is completely arbitrary. And there's no percentage that they're looking for.
Since capital funds are excluded, if our district funds curriculum rotation with Fund 610, would it be better to transfer that amount from 610 to 001 and purchase the books from 001? Please advise. Capital funds are excluded, however, with the exception of those 3 object codes, which will cover your books, 6641 through 6643. So even though you're paying for those from 610, that was the exception to the rule. That was the asterisk that was on that slide.
I think we have time for what? One more question?
You can do one more. Let's see. Let's try to find a good one. I see some statements. I'm looking for some actual questions.
Yeah, thank you all. You make it a little more fun for us as we see some of the statements.
And we do see some of your suggestions that came in. See one on the information sheet. Let's see, would these 5% cuts have to be in every department or just across the board as long as it's equal to 5%? As Chuck pointed out earlier, we are going to do more guidance once we actually see some legislative language on that cut regarding district additional assistance. And at that point, we'll know what the rules are, and we'll perhaps put together another webinar to explain how those cuts are going to work, especially in regards to how the CFOs are going to certify that those cuts have been put into place.
That's a perfect way of kind of concluding this part of the webinar, because as Jeremy said and as Chuck pointed out as well, this was just a kind of a baseline of what is, both of what the definitions are, what constitutes each of these various funds, and then also hopefully starting to create the understanding within your own communities and with legislators. And then subsequently, we'll take a look as any proposal has more detail. But really, we believe that this is a huge influencer, that we can change the conversation, actually be able maybe to change things that have been frustrating all along. There's a lot of questions up there about does this professional development go in non-classroom or classroom? These are the things that have been frustrating for us over a number of years. I think we have an opportunity to look at this as an opportunity to do right by what is actually being performed within our public schools, and we'll have a subsequent webinar in order to discuss those.
Yes, and as we close, I'll take one last shot at pitching the ASBO data collection project. For those of you that have gotten those Excel files back, you can see that it takes every single transaction that you submit and tags it as classroom, administration, or whatever category that expenditure applies to. So for the vast majority of these questions that are up here, that would be good to have that file. So that way when you look at where you're spending, you'd have that detailed information by transaction about what category it ended up going into. But, well, thank you all for tuning in to this webinar. Thank Ernie Nicely once again for putting this on for us. And looking forward to seeing all of you at the summer conference.